All right. Well, we're back here with John Dupuy, representing Integral Recovery, author of Integral Recovery and pioneer in the field of addiction recovery. And I'm Bob Weathers, the curriculum developer here at Cal Southern in the School of Behavioral Sciences. And I want to continue our conversation from this morning's master lecture provided by you, John, expertly, well received. And I know that because of the depth of where you went with the various topics, there were a couple of topics that I'd be interested to hear more about. In the Aqua model developed by Ken Wilber that you've applied to integral recovery, I wonder if you'd have a word or two to say about the relevance and the application of typology.
Great, thanks. We didn't get a chance to cover that this morning.
Yeah.
And it's last but in no way least part of the integral map.
Yeah.
So there's many types of typology. We use the Enneagram mainly, and then you have the Jungian ones, which you're familiar with, and there's various kinds. I think it's very important to include a typology of different personality types because we're different.
Yeah.
And if we don't acknowledge that, sometimes we run into the error of thinking, well, I'm this type of personality, so what worked for me is going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
Or in different types will use drugs for different reasons, for different strategies, trying to avoid themselves in different ways. So it adds a lot of complexity and a lot of self-understanding.
Yes.
And they're just talking with students that are beginning recovery, there's nothing more interesting to a person than themselves.
Right.
And when they start to see the patterns and the unconscious patterns working out and how it's affected their lives and kind of the work they need to do to get through that and use their strengths and put that all together, it becomes very exciting. But before we get there, let's just talk about the basic masculine-feminine typology, which is very important. And notice we masculine-feminine, not man-woman, because all of us, as a schooled in Jung, we have masculine and feminine as a part of each person, and the gender is something else. But there tends to be masculine pathologies that are brought out by using drugs as we devolve into the latter stages of the progression of the disease that really come to the fore. And the masculine pathology is something like this. It is, hey, I'm the only one that matters. It's all about me. Get out of my way. I'm an island. No, what I do is my business, not your business. Me, yo, yo, yo. Like, okay. Extreme narcissism to the point of being a sociopath. And the feminine pathology tends to be more the codependent type, that you give yourself away in inappropriate ways because you're not worthy and to get drugs, and it's just this dishonoring and lack of boundaries with the self.
Yeah.
So for the man or the masculine entity to get healthy, it needs to incorporate the healthy feminine. In other words, newsflash, it's not all about you. You're supposed to nurture and care for others. You're kidding, really? Yes. So that's when the man becomes healthy, when they integrate the healthy feminine. And on the feminine side, it's like giving yourself away, oh, I'm not worthy, whatever, all this codependent behavior becomes no. It becomes healthy boundaries. You know when it's right to say no, and you know how to take care of yourself. And so these are important things that are issues that are exacerbated by the disease and the progression, the negative and the masculine, feminine, and masculine and feminine negative. And when we get in recovery, we have to bring forth the healthy parts of us and how they help us, and the caring for the masculine and the healthy boundaries for the feminine.
Yeah, I like it. It's both a map for what goes wrong, but also a guidebook for getting back to what may rebalance the equation. That sounds good to me.
And one of the, I think, valuable critiques of 12 Steps by the feminist is that it's a very masculine model. It was made for a bunch of upper middle class white guys who really needed to, get their alcohol-soaked egos in check and get humble and realize, and that's great. But a lot of addicts who come are not in that. They're not upper middle class. They're not successful. They're, and they can be feminine. What if, they're a crack whore, somebody on the streets living through that? They don't even have an ego sense at this point. And so you don't need to deflate the ego at that point. You need to create one from almost from scratch. So anyway, by understanding these differences, it can give us a much more effective and complex and deeper understanding of the recovery process.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I know we have a limited time today, and it could deserve a whole series of itself, but you mentioned the Enneagram earlier. Might you say just a word or two, let's say in 5 minutes or so, just to give kind of a basic introduction to our viewers?
Well, the Enneagram is a model that I began studying in graduate school 20-something years ago, and it is there's 9. It's Enneagram is Greek for 9 points on a geometric figure, and so there are 9 basic personality styles. And I happen to be a 6 on the Enneagram, and I'm a counterphobic 6. It means fear is my deal. It's what I'm struggling with, and I develop all kinds of strategies to deal with my fear.
Alrighty.
And in the case of addiction, one will often use drugs and alcohol to cope with anxiety, cope with fear, to become brave. And so it's really tied into that. Now, that's just me.
Yes.
So if I created a whole model based on my pathology and my issues as a 6, it might not work very well for the rest of us. So there's 9 basic points. I can run and just gallop around the points. Is number 1 is a perfectionist. There's not much black and white. It's the judge. On the pathological end, there's a lot of self-condemnation and self-judgment, and often one will use drugs to silence that voice. The 2 is the helper, the proverbial Jewish mother or the Mormon mother, where I come from. They're very helpful, sweet, controlling. This is like, back off, mom, and they lose themselves in trying to manipulate and control people, and they would use drugs for their own particular issues. And codependency is a big part of it. And
that makes sense too.
needing boundaries and learning what true service is instead of service with an agenda, service to manipulate, etc. 3 is the type A, American personality, the achiever, the doer. They get things done, and they might use drugs to feel better, to have more energy. Cocaine might be a drug that would really stimulate that.
before.
I feel great, my ego's good. Hey, I got the world. You know. So anyway, and 4 is the tragic romantic poet. They are the artists, the musicians, and not all artists and musicians, but a lot of them are 4s. And there's a kind of a wallowing in self-pity and depth, and my suffering is greater than anybody's suffering, and I'm very special, and all this kind of stuff that can really get in the way of bringing their gifts to the fore. A 5 is a thinker. Ken Wilber, who came up in the conversation, is like a classic archetype of a thinker. They live in the abstract and intellectual world. They can draw big maps, and a lot of great things can come out in the healthy side of the street. And all the points have their really healthy sides, and they have their average sides, and they have their very pathological. On the pathological side, you have dissociative disorders. They're dead from the neck down.
Cut off.
So it's like this. And so they might use drugs in order to try to heal that gap so they can actually feel their emotions and feel their body again, or use drugs to reinforce the mental excessive spinning up here. 6 is about fear, and of course any drug that makes me feel safe, like alcohol or heroin, might be very tempting. 7 7 is the hedonist. 7 is the epicure. 7, it's all about having fun, and life is just one fun thing after the next, and it's like the honeybee going from thing to thing to thing, and everything's interesting and fun. It tends to be in the pathological side very shallow. Because it's a strategy.
Are you saying I'm shallow?
I'm not saying I'm shallow. I said the pathological side. You're very deep. On the pathological side, there's an avoidance of depth, and so you keep doing things like that. And of course, drugs would be, party drugs, anything to have fun, cool altered states, da 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 da. So that could be a problem with 7. 8 is the leader, the heavy, and they're very powerful. And prison is full of them because before they get to a higher evolved level, they can be very powerful criminals or thugs or threatening because they're very strong. And they would use drugs just to reinforce that and to avoid that very, very, very tender, vulnerable. All that power and all that strength is really a way of protecting the inner self. And so drugs that would help them feel safe and relax and actually allow them to access that very vulnerable part might be part of an 8 strategy. And I don't just want to bag on 8s. Now, 8s, when they get it together, can be like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi's. They can be world-class leaders and changers. So there's great potential for ill, but also even probably greater potential for good. And 9, last but not least, is the peacemaker. They're kind of, you ever remember Ferdinand the Bull? It was a comic book, or when we were kids, and in this little kid's book, Ferdinand was the one. He'd sit on the sidelines and sniff the flowers, and all the other bulls are running around doing bull things, right? And so that's the 9. They're kind of peaceful. You see, and they have this gentle aspect to them. They're very receptive. They're very perceptive. They can make very good therapists because they can really intuitively know what you're feeling. Sometimes they lose boundaries. It's like, what are you feeling? Me feeling like this. And they will either, and maybe part of the problem with nines is they can be very lazy, and maybe drugs to help them check out from the world and not engage.
Yeah.
So that's the just thumbnail,
I know.
brief introduction.
I know it's great to introduce it. Let me make a comment, and then we'll wrap up this part. It's something I appreciate about both you talking about masculine and feminine typology, and also about the Enneagram, is that there's a respect for the truth or the good in any one of these,
Absolutely.
as well as the limitations and the pathologies of it. It reminds me of John Lennon when he said, "Everything is true, and so is its opposite." And I feel like you're embracing that here. And I know that in studying psychology, it's possible to get wedded to either what represents my own psychology, well, I'm going to apply that to everybody else, and also at its worst to pathologize anything that's not my front yard. And I think this keeps us honest. I really appreciate the value of both these typologies. Thank you, sir. That's really good.